Like, where do you even start with training the LLM?
Me and about 500 people on this Discord channel were like, we could do it ourselves, right? People are like, oh, you just scrape the internet. That wasn't done. And so the Pile was the first large open data set that was designed for training these large language models.
What does AI mean for the future of democracy?
This is where they make decisions that are jurisdictionally relevant to everybody that lives in there. This is building a new layer of civic infrastructure.
You've watched federal AI policy evolve across 2 administrations, Biden, Trump. What's getting better and what's getting worse? So our guest today, I'm super excited to have him with us. He's a physicist turned AI leader, nearly 15 years in federal service, co-author of the Pile, the foundational open source database for training of LLMs. He spent some time in the White House on AI policy as an acting chief AI officer, and worked with the CDC and actually achieved a 500% ROI return, which is absolutely amazing, given that most businesses are struggling to get returns on their AI investment at the minute. And he's currently co-founded GroundVue, an AI data infrastructure for state and local government. Travis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. So you're a physicist. How does a physicist end up running AI at the CDC?
That's a great story. It's a long one and it's a fun one, but I can give you the short version. So physics has always been involved with computer science and algorithms and figuring out the best way to solve a problem. I think when people think about AI nowadays, they think about generative AI or agentic AI, these large frontier models, but really the foundations of AI go all the way back to the 60s or even the late 50s when people were doing machine learning kind of algorithms. And we've heard this story before, but as a physicist, kind of cutting my teeth on protein folding, which is how I went from my physics degree into the computer science and, like early AI models, was through machine learning, right? You're optimizing some really hard problem. Maybe the problem is kind of interesting and related to the real world, like computer vision, which we have a lot of examples of. Maybe it's really funky in terms of like how you actually get to the solution, like protein folding. And there were all these different kind of converging methods that were coming out. This is pre-transformers. So I think a lot of your audience has, heard about Attention is All You Need. It's this great paper by a bunch of Google folks. But before that, we were really, really thinking about how you take some solution space, some problem that you're thinking about, whether it's protein folding or figuring out the words that we're saying on this podcast and turning them into text, or large language models before we even had large language models. So they were just language models, right? Things like word2vec or things even before that, or computer vision, how we take these really different multimodal sources of information and we convert them into something that is in a different mathematical space. And that sort of process is literally what physics is about, right? The mathematical side is taking something that is messy and real world and applying some sort of mathematical abstraction onto it. And that abstraction in the computer science space, if we try to smooth it out, is really good for machine learning. And later, it became really, really good through other modern methods of turning those sort of abstractions into things that were really good for optimizing over things like language or audio or vision.
Beautiful. What an articulation of that. I love it.
Okay, but how does it get used for the CDC specifically?
Right. So a little bit more on my backstory. So I started doing high energy physics, which is where you take atoms and you spin them around really fast and you smash them together and you look to see what comes out of that. That was my undergrad. Went to do my graduate studies on things like protein folding. So kind of in the biomedical space. Did 2 postdocs, which is definitely 1 too many, maybe 2 too many postdocs at the National Institutes of Health, where I did chemical physics and then physical chemistry. Still interested in this idea of you have a structure of a protein, so a sequence of amino acids, and then what shape does it fold into? We were doing like molecular modeling and other sorts of like interesting techniques. And when I was in there, I was like, hey, I think deep learning is the way to make this structure prediction. And, some of the people that were working on in the field, they're like, no, it's never going to solve like molecular modeling. We're never going to get there. And when I left my postdoc, I was like, oh, maybe they're right. Maybe this is not going to work. End up winning the Nobel Prize a few years ago. So like that technique, it was really validating to see all that happen. But I left doing the hard science work into kind of more policy work at the National Institutes of Health. Started working on what's kind of called portfolio analysis today. So NIH gives out something like $36 billion of grant money every year. And they only fund about 10% of the applications. So there's this huge universe of counterfactuals, things that we didn't fund. And so it's really interesting to look at, like from the NIH perspective, what could we have funded? And if you look retrospectively, like, did we make the right investment decisions? And that is, we get, I think it's like 100,000 or so applications every year across the different grant mechanisms. And so you have this incredible corpus of text. And this is before we had all these like great large language models. And so I had the really fortunate ability to work on some of this data and say, hey, things like Word2Vec, which had just come out, we can like start clustering these and looking at them and mapping demographics to them, which I'm happy to talk about cool stuff we did on that. And then get real good insights that policymakers and people who are thinking about grants can actually act on. We did some work and it was like actually cited by Congress, which is really cool to like do something in the executive branch that Congress is like, oh, this is really important. And that like kind of cut my teeth on thinking about how like early AI could be used for things that aren't like immediately obvious, which was like policy work. After the after the NIH, I joined the CDC in November of 2020. So like deep into the pandemic, which is a wild time to join a public health agency. But they were looking for people who could do data. So I joined the National Center for Health Statistics, which is the organization within the USA that collects all of our medical statistics. So our births, our deaths, our nutrition statistics. These are like our federal statistics. And I joined as their chief data scientist. And so I did a lot of data science work on this. And then, there's a lot of really interesting things that were going on in that space, but it was COVID time. So there's like a lot of immediate data work. And so as COVID kind of went down and we started to get a handle on the US, we had more time to kind of explore all these cool things that I had developed and all the cool things that industry was developing. I was like, let's bring some of this work to public health, to CDC. And so I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but that's like the journey of the like baby physicist working on high energy physics, always doing something computer science, machine learning related that then led to me at the CDC with this like incredible opportunity.
Hey guys, we're really hoping that you're enjoying this episode so far. And if you are, please like, subscribe and follow. And if you really want to know more about who we are and what we do, go to buildinggreattech.com. Now let's go back to the episode. And how did you manage to get them 500% ROI?
So CDC is the first US federal agency, to my knowledge. Maybe the intelligence community did it before we did, but they wouldn't talk about it. But the first federal agency to have ChatGPT or any generative AI to the entire agency. Like nowadays, it's kind of commonplace. We think that everybody has access to Claude or ChatGPT or Grok. But early 2023, like that was kind of novel, and it was really hard to push that through the federal government. We were kind of lucky in the sense that CDC had partnered and already built our infrastructure on the Azure stack. Like some organizations had built on AWS Bedrock, we built ours on Azure, but OpenAI partnered with Azure and they made it part of their service. And so I could go to our IT folks, I could go to our cybersecurity folks and be like, hey, this isn't a new thing that requires a new ATO, which is an authority to operate. this is just another Microsoft service. It's just an Outlook. It's just a PowerPoint. It's just another thing in our technology stack. And so I convinced everybody, along with a bunch of others, that this new technology can be brought in. And so we wrote this kind of crazy paper internally within CDC on what generative AI means for public health. And this was like really, really early on in generative AI days. And we brought that to leadership. It's like 100 pages. Nowadays, everybody's had like an explainer on what generative AI is. How is it helpful? What is a hallucination? But this was really like the first in federal government. And they looked at it and they're like, hey, this actually works. Is it going to cost a lot? And I'm like, not really, because there's just API access. And if you're using it for a small amount of stuff, it doesn't cost that much. And so we were able to turn it on for everybody. We had to build our own front end because it didn't exist. Like there wasn't a ChatGPT on enterprise yet, right? Like none of this stuff existed. So internally, we built our own front end to the API. We connected it. But because we did all that work, we had access to the intermediary and we could see everything that was coming through. So it's a government service, right? And there's no expectation of privacy. You're doing your work on here. And so we told all our staff, like, this is a tool. We provided trainings, and we're also going to analyze how you're using this tool. So we did. So after about a year of running this, people had started to come online. And there was like the beginnings of talk about like, is this technology useful? And there's like all these think pieces and all these explainers on like, AI is going to be amazing. It's going to transform everything. But nobody was taking measurements. Nobody was doing the thing. Nowadays, there's a few. But what we did was we took all of our messages and we analyzed about 10% of them. And we used ChatGPT to put them into buckets. We looked at the business community and they had done some studies on the outside of like, what are people using generative AI for and how much time saving is associated with it? Like, are you summarizing a meeting? Are you helping write an email? Are you doing mission critical work like epidemiology work or like reading a research article and having it summarize it for you? And how much time do you think that could be saved? We looked at a bunch of estimates across business and science that had come up with those like time-saving estimates, found the median, took the lower bound of all of the estimates and said, cool, that's how much time saving each one of these tasks are going to take. And then we extrapolated. We took that 10% sample and said, okay, does it fit into this bucket, into this bucket, into this bucket? And then for every single message, then we had an estimate of time saved. And again, this is a lower bound estimate. Then we know all the messages saved. And then we have an estimate of, so many thousands of hours saved. From that, we could look at the amount of time each employee is worth and how much it costs for them to, for them to be doing the work, which is a really complicated thing to do, right? Like there are folks that are like equivalent of CEOs at the government. Their pay is much higher. And we were kind of working through this. And what you typically do in the business world is use what's called a blended rate. So we found a blended rate of $90 per hour, which is a really, again, very conservative estimate of how much it actually costs. And with that estimate and the hours saved, that gets us the amount of money that we were saving by using this tool. And so then we had to work in all of our capital costs, right? Like we had to build the system. So we talked about how much engineering time did it take to build this front end? How much are we actually paying for API costs? How much is this going to be? And then we have like a simple business model. And I'm not a business person. So we talk to business development folks and like, okay, we've got money, we've got time saved, we've got our capital estimates, we've got all of these things out there. And they're like, well, this is amazing, right? Like nobody's done this. And so that's how we came up with the 500% return on investment. So we put money in, we built the front end to this chatbot. We are paying for the costs, and here is all of our estimates used. We have this great spreadsheet that kind of looks through and says like, oh, this is how much time is saved on this. This is how much time is saved on this. And anybody you talk to, then you get really suspicious. They're like, hey, like, how do you actually know what people are using? And then once you walk them through the spreadsheet, like internally, and they look at it and you're like, oh yeah, all of this seems reasonable. And if you want to argue something, you're arguing, I'm like, oh, maybe we only save our ROI is only 490%. Bummer, right? Or maybe it's 510%, right? Like you're arguing fractions of where it comes from. And that's totally cool. The 500% ROI is a really great number because it just shows that the return on this sort of investment on a basic chatbot is insane once you get there. I have a lot more to say on like how this could be better, but I want to pause and see if you guys have
I think that's fascinating. Like at such an early time when there were so few businesses actually implementing these tools at that time, so that's really amazing that you did that and then managed to pull in that data and make those really logical steps to actually, okay, how do we actually prove a return on that investment? What do you think the challenges are for like the private sector with actually doing that same thing? Because seems like quite a struggle at the moment for the business world that actually should be better at this stuff or know it sort of firsthand. Yeah, that seems to be a real challenge.
It is, and I'll tell you where it gets really complicated really quickly. So we specifically bounded our study to the dumbest and most simple thing, right? Like the tasks that we could quantify, the things that we know people were using. And so in that constrained sense, we were able to say like the money we put in and the things that we're getting out are incredible value. Where it gets really complicated, one is if you want to do this study in your own company, you have to be able to intercept the messages in some way. So like we had a data intermediary, which was us, and we could actually analyze all our messages. So if you have that, you have the ability to do your own analysis. If you just buy Claude or OpenAI, like an enterprise instance, usually in private settings, like you have to analyze your Splunk logs and it gets complicated and then your privacy issues, right? It's an added complication for these sorts of things. So like that's one small challenge, but that's surmountable. The bigger problem is once you get past these basic use cases, which like honestly, everybody in the world, in the business world, they're already using AI for these sorts of tests anyways. One, I don't think it needs to be done. It's established that like there are time savings and for most of your people, it's worth it. Then you get into mission specific AI cases. And so like, I'll kind of walk through some of these, the most obvious of which is using some sort of AI assisted programming. So this is Claude for Code, this is Codex. These are these things where your programmers are turbocharged. Many people have done studies on how effective these things are. I think it takes people who are 10x programmers, makes them 100x programmers, takes people who are 100x programmers, and if they're really good at it, can make them 10,000x programmers. It is incredible what it can do. I've also seen these things take, people who are just beginning. I don't want to say disparagingly, like 1x programmers, people who had just learned to code, can make them much worse, right? They can produce code much faster that is of lower quality and actually is detrimental to the organization. So like the implementation takes work to do, and also the costs don't scale as nicely. Like I think there's a story where a bunch of companies are finding out it's really expensive if you give your employees the best models and let them go crazy. Like hundreds of thousands of dollars crazy. So looking at the like coding specific tasks, you start thinking about, okay, like this is a specific domain of tasks. Can we bound this task? Can we figure out how much this is time savings and how much this costs? And you can start doing it for programming, and people have. And like that is another domain you move into. But then you're like, well, we have other domains. CDC is a public health agency. Like there's epidemiologists, there are library science folks, there's people who look at infectious diseases or chronic diseases, and they're working on specific programs. And your time savings might be in a corpus of like 20 people, right? Because they're working on like something mission critical, but it's just 20 people. And so you have to develop a whole evaluation criteria for those 20 people. And then like all of your assumptions need to be validated. You need to work with them. You need to go through it. And it becomes incredibly labor intensive to figure out like, what is the return on investment for something, some awesome tool that you've built for these 20 people? You can do it, but the return on investment for the return on investment calculations stops being worth it for like all of these specific niche things. And these niche things are what really powers an organization or a business, right? There is a baseline thing that everybody needs to do. There's like administrative tasks. There are, maybe base science tasks that we have to do at the agencies that I've worked for. But then there's like the programmatic stuff, and they're all different. And so I have not done an ROI study, and I don't think anybody really has, except for like specific domains like coding, because it's really hard to actually do all this work. So that's why we're not seeing it, because it's hard and people don't want to put in the work. I think this is something where, everybody loves a 500% number. They love it. It's like headline grabbing, right? And it's quantitative. But when you start going to programmatic stuff, you really do need qualitative research. You need qualitative sciences. You got to sit down with your people and talk to them. And that is not something that every organization really has time or wants to do.
Don't we know that?
Don't we?
You co-authored The Pile. What is that?
I did. So, earlier in the episode, we were talking about the transition from me going from the National Institutes of Health to the CDC. There was a small break of time where I was actually not employed by the federal government, which was kind of fun. And during that time, it was right during the pandemic. I had left the NIH, a month before the pandemic. And then, basically the world fell apart. Everybody was confined to their homes. A lot of the knowledge workers really didn't have anything to do, but I was here. I'm an early AI researcher. I'm unemployed and having a great time. And so I, like everybody else that were starting sourdough or, learning new things, I was like, I'm going to do the thing I like to do and code and find other people that are working on this. I ended up finding this channel on Discord that was full of people who were just looking at all of the different AI models that were coming out. And so this is right when GPT-2 came out, before GPT-3. And the timeline is GPT-2, then GPT-3, then 3.5, and then ChatGPT. So we're well before that. And GPT-2 was the first one that was like, oh my gosh, this is working. The thing that we know theoretically can work is starting to work. But there is no data set for it. They didn't release the model. They weren't doing the academic thing. And so me and about 500 people on this Discord channel were like, we could do it ourselves, right? We had the hubris. We had the chutzpah to go for it. And so I don't know if you've ever tried to organize anything on a Discord channel. It's a hot mess, but we did it. And we decided we're going to train our own large language model, right? One of the first ones, and we're going to do it in the open. We're going to document our process. And out of that 500, there's about 15 of us who actually did the work. But we were documenting everything that was actually happening. People were contributing their thoughts, and Discord is a crazy place, and there's all sorts of thoughts that were being dropped. But we realized if we're going to train our own large language model, we have to get our own data set. And there wasn't a data set yet. There wasn't a corpus of stuff that was large enough to train something like GPT-2. Right? There was like little ones here and there. And we know to train large language models, people are like, oh, you just scrape the internet and you put these things together. That wasn't done. And it wasn't obvious yet what parts of the internet you want to scrape, what was high quality and what wasn't. And so the Pile was the first large open data set that was designed for training these large language models. And, we developed it. My contribution to this, because I was coming from federal service, was looking at all of the federal data sets that existed that were high quality. So you could build a large language model with any text. But most of it on the internet is kind of garbage, and it's not great, or it's repetitive, or it's like machine generated, and you don't want these sorts of things. Like you don't want scammy, like SEO type sites, like cluttering up your large language model, especially when they're small relative to what we had today. You want high quality text. And you want high quality text that represents the things that you're interested in. And so I helped pull all of the grant text that ever came out of the NIH, or all of the publications that came out of PubMed, which is, most of them in recent years have the full text. So we had all of the recent biomedical history. We had all the grants that NIH had funded that were publicly available. We had all of the US's Patent and Trade Office. So we pulled everything from USPTO, everything that we could find that was open to the public and available and high quality is what we pulled into the Pile. We also pulled in Wikipedia. We also pulled in other sources. And we got to have some really, really fun discussions on what we should exclude, right? nobody had these discussions like in public on what sources of material from the internet. So there was a scrape of the internet, but what parts do we keep? What sort of quality controls do we put in? Do we scrape fanfic? Because that was a source of things that we were looking at. And we had pulled it, and we had looked at it, and we said, do we want these sort of things? Do people consent to these sort of things? And these discussions had never really happened before. So we published this paper, and it came out on the archive, and with tremendous success, in a way that, like, I had been a researcher for, like a full decade and a half, and I'd get like 5 citations on my paper, and I was like, this is amazing. And now I've got like 1,000 citations on this paper. It has its own Wikipedia page. I'm like, okay, all I needed to do was like join a Discord channel, and then I get the academic success that I'm looking for. But what I love about this paper is, like, nowadays it feels kind of tiny relative to the data sets, but it was the one that really sparked a lot of interest in, like, hey, I can do this myself. So a lot of academic researchers took this data set and they built open large language models, and some of them were great, some of them sucked. And people could then learn from each other and say, oh, when I did X, I got Y. And that is like the basis of doing science, is kind of doing it in the open, publishing what's working, publishing what's not. And, I do love my frontier large language model companies. I think, OpenAI, Anthropic, they're doing amazing things. But because of like the competitive nature, not everything that they're doing, all their secret sauce isn't in the open. And so having a robust open science community, open source community is vital, I think, to kind of pushing the field forward. And the gap between where industry is and where the open science thing sometimes gets really big, but they're always closing that gap. And the closer that gap is, I think the more innovation we will have both in America and across the world.
I read somewhere that the current models have like 30 or even 40% data from Reddit or, places like that, which is quite, I'm not sure if it's the best source of data to support those models, but I guess maybe that's why we're not getting the best results. But I don't know if it's true. I don't know if anyone actually released any data on like where the data is coming from.
Yeah, I think for things like Reddit and Twitter, both of those companies, and see what's the other. So Reddit and Twitter, they both realize the value of their data, and so they've kind of closed down or like have developed partnerships with some of these companies. Obviously, XAI is deeply associated with Twitter, and it's trained off of that. If you over-index on a particular source of data, your large language model is going to reflect the culture and the biases of that data. And I say biases not as a bad thing, because we as humans are biased. Everything that we do exists in a cultural context, and that cultural context is the bias in which we operate. And so if you over-index, or even if you index on a particular website, you're incorporating all of that culture and bias on there. I don't think that large language models text corpus is 40% Reddit. It's probably closer to 5 to 10% if they're using it, or probably less. Like, Reddit's big, but it's not that big relative to everything that exists on the internet. But yeah, the more you include, the more you're incorporating those things. And there's no value judgment on Reddit users. I use it a lot, but it's definitely a different demographic than other folks that exist in the world.
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff you mentioned about training the LLM model, LLM, is absolutely fascinating, because not like we don't really have a chance to talk to somebody who did it from like the start. If you were like to describe like for us who don't do the stuff that you do, like where do you even start with training the LLM?
So you can actually do it yourself. You can train a really awful large language model. So a transformer, which is the one, like, that's the architecture, that is the way that most of the large language models are used now, is not the only way you could do these. You could train things with things like convolutional neural networks or recurrent neural networks, or even like these multi-layer perceptrons, which all these things sound super complicated, but really you could train a neural network with just 3 neurons. right? You have one piece of input and it goes through one little network of like 3 neurons and then one output. And it can be trained to recognize one word or another, or one thing or another, and you can figure out how to do this. And there are Kaparthi did a really great blog study on doing this from scratch, like writing Python code yourself that does the matrix multiplies to go through and do this. Obviously, like this is a difference of like, you're asking like, hey, how do I build a car? And I'm like, instead of building like a car, an internal combustion engine, which is hard, like let's think of the different components. Like you could build a vehicle with wheels that doesn't have an engine, right? And kids do this all the time, right? Like a little soapbox that goes down a hill, and you learn about mechanics, right? You learn about how mechanical construction works. And then if you want to learn about an internal combustion engine, you could break that down into its components, right? And then if you're like, actually, I don't really care how to build a car, I just maybe want to drive a car better, right? That's a different task. And so I challenge your question a little bit, like how would one learn to do this, is to break down what is the thing you actually want to learn. And then whatever that is, the more you can articulate that thing, the more you can find somebody who's broken down that particular skill and has gone from that. If you're the person at the end who's just like the driver and like, hey, I have a small corpus of data and I want to train a large language model or fine tune it to be more like XYZ, that's a very specific question than doing this from scratch. And there's tons of blogs and explainers that will tell you how to get a crafty version of that as like a teaching model.
So it seems like, can anyone create large language model?
Anyone can create a language model. Large language models require a little bit more work, and good large language models take even more work from an engineering perspective. But 100%, we were training language models just with the works of Shakespeare, and it would produce really, really awful Shakespeare, like pre-transformers. Like you could do this like 2015, 2016. You could make like a small corpus of text and have it try to predict the next letter. And was it awful? Yes. But was it a language model? 100% yes.
That's interesting. Well, so is there a world where, because at the minute, the corporate world is kind of adopting the large language models, OpenAI, Anthropic. Yeah. Is there a world where private sector start building their own models with the data that they have? Because, it's coming where the startups are going to turn the dial and start properly charging for the usage. Do you think that might push more private companies into this art form of building your own LMM?
So there's a huge ecosystem that already exists of exactly what you say. Right. There's and where this comes into it is the domain specific ones. So in the medical field, this has always existed, where reading really hyper specific terms, or in the medical billing world, for example, right? There's specific things that you really do care about that is a combination of pattern matching and large language models, because you can't get certain things wrong ever. And you have to interpret other things in a more large language model, looser context, right? And that domain specific piece is where you'll find literally thousands of startups right now that are working on things, some that use frontier large language models and then downstream process them in a really unique way, and others that are training their own large language models. You've got the frontier model companies, and they're killing it in building a general purpose model. And they're really good in specific tasks that they have benchmarks for, but they're not going to have the time or effort to go into really niche subfields. And that's where you're seeing so much progress.
Okay. You've watched federal AI policy evolve across 2 administrations, Biden, Trump. Mm-hmm. What are they? What's getting better and what's getting worse?
I think now, and this is just speaking from the national scale, there's a lot to say internationally that I don't feel qualified to talk about, but it's a really interesting thing for maybe another podcast guest, is that America has really started to embrace innovation. It's hard with a new technology to kind of look through and say, what are the dangers? What are the risks? And we're at the point now where I think we recognize that this is a very disruptive and a very exciting technology. And the administration is really pushing, and I think in many ways a good way, to kind of drive America towards adoption. There are a lot of concerns that I have around that in terms of energy use, data centers, a lot of things that affect people at the very local levels that I think we should be paying more attention to. And then this is where I have my disagreements with the administration and how they're pushing it and how the local considerations are being made. But I will say, from a policy perspective, there's a lot of drive towards the adoption and implementation of AI.
I have actually a question around that. So, these days, obviously, people using ChatGPT and so on for answering like basic questions, which previously they probably would have Googled or would go to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia, for instance, it was kind of like community kind of, there was a big community that was taking care of the quality of the data and things like that. Now, if everyone starts using ChatGPT, like nobody knows where the data is coming from, how can we sort of make sure that we are not being brainwashed or like, that actual information, historical information and data is correct, if this is going to be the source that our children and, going to use for like basic knowledge?
So can I turn your question around? Because I have probably a different response to that one as somebody who's worked in the government, right? Especially for an organization like the CDC or somebody like the NIH, whose one of our missions is to give information out to the public, right? Like we're not Wikipedia, but CDC likes to consider itself a definitive source of information. And we want to be included in those results. And so like when Google first started coming to prominence, right? You said Google as like a bygone assumption. That's where people are going. But that wasn't always the case, right? Federal agencies had to think through, like, what is this thing called SEO? How do I make myself more available to be the definitive source of information? Where are our stakeholders? Where's our consumers coming to get this information? And how do we make sure that we maintain our authority and trustworthiness in this new place where people are getting the data? And you said Google, right? Like as if that's the place to go and that's the trustworthy place. But that's just another company, right? It's another algorithm to deliver information. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, people in the federal government, to figure out ways of making the data not just AI ready, but AI accessible. And this is the thing like I have been pushing for so hard. And there's some incredible people within the federal government that are just starting to work on these things. Thinking about like, for the data sources that exist that aren't on a web page that you could Google or AI could Google and get the answer to, but they're locked up in the database. And when I say locked up, there's an API for them. But right now, none of the AI models use APIs in a really great way. Like you can build one for it, but like automatically they're not going to do it. They need things like model context protocols. They need MCPs. They need these connective layers to do this. And I think it's our job to be building these things, right? Like most corporations don't want everybody to steal and use their data. CDC is different. Federal government's different. They actually want their data to be used, right? Like we build APIs so that people can build businesses off them, right? Like Census has this wonderful API where you can access all of their stuff if you know how to use it. And you are encouraged to build whole products off of that, right? And like Census doesn't get any money for these sorts of things. It is a public service. It is part of the public infrastructure layer, these APIs. And so building MCPs, these model context protocols, should be the next logical step for the federal government. And so I don't want to dismiss your concerns because I think there's a lot to talk about. But I will say from my perspective, we should be doing more to get the information that is definitive and authoritative to be out there for the large language models. So when somebody uses ChatGPT instead of Google, or they use Anthropic to ask the question, what comes up are those pieces of information.
That is very interesting. And then, so how do you think that the government is positioned like the administration is positioned with the right skill set to push that forward? I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tristan Harris's work, but I've seen some of the conversations. I mean, he's quite fear mongering over it. But some of the conversations where he's been and had conversations with government, and it seems like there's quite a considerable disconnect between those like with the responsibility and the ability to act and the actual understanding of the technology and the things that are being kind of discussed, if that makes sense.
I mean, but this isn't new though, is it? Right? Like there's always been a disconnect between a new and novel technology and the federal government, right? Like this is something that it takes, the federal government is a massive bureaucracy in every country, and it takes time for that organization, that bureaucracy to shift forward. And they're not like a company that has the same external pressures where shifting changes your bottom line and you can get efficiencies. The pressures come from different sources. They come from the public requesting things. They come from Congress mandating certain things. They come from the executive branch leadership saying, hey, I want XYZ to happen, whether that's an agency head leader, whether it's our Office of Management and Budget, OMB, whether it's the executive White House branch themselves saying things, one of like the senior advisors to the president. Those are the sort of people that need to initiate the change. Is there a disconnect? 100%. And it will always be there. I want to hear people more like myself within the federal government saying we need to do these things. And like I've been there for 15 years, working on a bunch of different things. And being a policy entrepreneur, trying new things in the federal government is something that takes a lot of patience, right? It's something that you really have to push forward bit by bit and watch your colleagues in industry just crush it, right? Because they're like, I installed 15 new packages and I tested out some, and they crashed their network, but it's fine because we just rebuilt it from scratch, right? Like they can do all these crazy things that we don't have access to. And so you have to like work on like a measured, slow response, but still have this like drive and energy. And those are hard things to maintain in the federal government. And so any sort of program that brings in young folks or like really spirited entrepreneurial folks that like, whether they're fellowships, whether they are internships into the federal government, like here in America, we have PIFs, Presidential Innovation Fellows. We have the U.S. Digital Corps. We have the U.S. Digital Service. These kind of like fellowship programs. And we also have the U.S. Tech Force that potentially may be really, really good. These programs are the ones that are really going to kickstart innovation. They have in the past, and I think they will in the future.
Love that. So you like having been in federal government for 15 years and then proved AI saving time and like value and at scale, you've now left to start again. Talk to us about that.
So I left just over 2 weeks ago now. I realized the federal government's doing some great and amazing things, but there's a gap. And having worked at the CDC, there was such an interesting interplay between public health on the federal side and all the different jurisdictional layers. So the states, the counties, the cities, the tribes, they all had different jurisdictional layers, and public health flowed through all of them. They all had public health departments. And the coordination through all these things was a massive effort. It's really important, but it was a really massive effort. And that's just one policy domain. And keeping track of what was happening at public health at city, state, tribal, local levels is complicated. But then you're asking what's happening for every policy domain. How are people coordinating? How is this actually happening? How is this tracking? And there's a huge gap there. And so me and a couple of other of our founders, Shannon Arvisu and Ann Lewis, were thinking, all ex-feds, like, is there a data source that exists that we could use to really understand what's happening at these local levels and help leaders, both at the like state level or local levels, work better? And so we're looking around and we're like, hey, public meetings. This is where all the magic happens. These city council meetings that might be in a town of 7,000 people, these board of supervisor meetings that happen in the counties with hundreds of thousands of people. This is where they make decisions that are jurisdictionally relevant to everybody that lives in there. And they're messy. they're unstructured. They don't always follow things like Robert's Rules of Order. They, go off on tangents, but real policy making happens here. And on the flip side, we have just gotten to the point now where AI is good enough to analyze these things at scale. And so we sat down, we did a pilot of this, and we showed it to a few folks, and they're like, this is amazing. How soon can you scale this up? I'm like, awesome. So we thought about this, and we ended up launching a company called GroundVue. That's GroundVue a couple of weeks ago, right when I left. And the idea of this company really is to use both AI and sociology to kind of analyze what's in the meeting sphere. So we're not using AI to generate new policies, right? Like anybody could just take a transcript and turn it into a ChatGPT interface, right? Like that's not the point. The point is for AI to listen. And it's going to listen in a way and tag things that are policy domain specific that people will really want to care about. It will also tag things about the frames of reference. How are they talking about this? Is this a quality of life issue? Is this an environmental issue? And so we have over 150 policy subdomains that we're working with subject matter experts to have really good tags on. And we're working with a bunch of sociologists to figure out like how are they talking about each one of these issues? And then you could start searching over these. And so what gets really, really exciting is like, one, yes, this will be great for policy research. Yes, this will help people track how a policy moves forward and how they can look across their peers if they want to pass a similar policy, like what's worked for them in the past. Yes, it will be great for advocacy groups that are doing research and want to get into a new county or city, like, and look at to see what policies has worked and how they talked about them. But where I get excited as the AI lead is this is building a new layer of civic infrastructure. So you can't Google meetings that happen right now, right? Like they don't exist. And even if you had the transcripts, they're not structured in a way that you can ask questions against them, right? There's just like too much unstructured text. But if you were to build this layer of every public meeting that has ever happened, and you were able to tag them and you were able to put them in front of a system that then could access these. We were talking about MCPs for the federal government. Now imagine MCPs for every meeting that's ever happened, every public meeting that's ever happened in America. And then imagine sitting that in front of deep research, right? And you want to ask the question, you want it to do the research, it could pull every relevant policy and start analyzing it and putting them all together. And suddenly you don't just have the loudest voices in the room or the people that have published things that are in newspapers. You have every policy. You have people who have talked about what has worked and what has failed in the relevant meetings. And then you start layering things like demographics, like is this a rural district? Is this an urban district? What is the demographic makeup of the people that are in there? And then you could start categorizing and getting totally new federal statistics.
Amazing. That sounds absolutely awesome. I was going to ask, like when you're creating this like system from the ground up, do you still see this kind of hallucination challenge? Is that something that you have to figure out how to address when, the quality of the data is so imperative and you keep it as good as possible?
Yeah, I think that's the question to ask. And it's a question about trust, right? Like none of this stuff is useful if you don't have trust against the data that you're doing, which is why we're really framing this as a tool not to write policies for you, which is where you get the hallucinations, but a tool that listens. And so where AI really excels is when you give it the right context and you say, hey, analyze this piece of information and then give me reasons why you have seen examples of XYZ within the text. That is where it's really, really good. And we can validate like, oh, humans have tagged this and it has an accuracy or precision or recall of a certain numbers. And so we know how good it's going to be. And so it's not a matter of hallucinations, it's a matter of like accuracy. And we can bound that. And we can say, we know it's going to be 99% accurate. We know what the errors look like. The things about hallucinations is you sometimes don't know where they come from, right? And they're surprising to you. It's like, oh, it just hallucinated facts. But if you're bounding it to a set of criteria, then you can say, oh, my errors exist within these domains. So we're not looking to have a situation to start to build this service that is going to then write new pieces of text. What it's going to do is provide this civic infrastructure layer that allows you to do searching over it. And so the AI is going to help us do the processing of all this. It's doing the listening for us, but it's not going to be doing the generating for us.
Okay, very interesting. Is it true that some of the lobbyists already have spotted that public meetings as a data source?
Yeah, that's, again, great question. And the answer is yes, right? Like, you could look at public meetings and say, wow, this is a great place to build democracy, right? This is a great place to kind of bring us together. Or you could look at this as a lobbyist and say, man, this is really great for corporate interests. And there are folks who are in this space, and best of luck to them, right? GroundVue is a public benefit corporation, which is really, really important to us to incorporate in such a way that our intentions as former feds is to build something, one, that's sustainable, which is why we're not a fully nonprofit. We're a PBC with a nonprofit arm. But to build something whose intentions that is buried within our DNA is going to be helping folks, helping advocacy groups that are aligned with the mission of improving household economic security, which is GroundVue's mission, and helping civic leaders make better decisions and provide the data to them. And so we think that we exist in a space that is the same data set that others are looking at. Because, again, it's public data. Anybody could be using this, but we're using it and we're building things and tools and ways of looking at the data that will be manifestly different from those that strictly want to make money, right? Because when you want to make money, you want to think about what extractive value can I get out of this population. When you want to build democracy, you want to look at what are the different tools we can build to help people work together. And so I think we're going to develop very different sort of products because we have very different intentions.
What does AI mean for the future of democracy?
We are building something around the public meeting data source. And obviously, when we're successful, we want to expand it to all sorts of like new meeting sources and new different kinds of modalities that are around democracy building. But what else can you do, right? Like, if there are other GroundVues that exist that are built by people who actually care about the world around them and whose mission is oriented with something that makes the world a better place, what do they look like? How do we bring them together? How do we say the folks that are doing the good work, how do we support them as companies, right? We are going to be in a struggle against the people who are going to have more money than us. People that are going to take oodles of venture capital, people that are looking for an exit, right? This is not how we're building a company. This is manifestly different. It is going to be a handicap for us, right? How do we support organizations like this? How do we make sure that AI is being used for good, right? Like, we have all these companies that are making all these hyperscalers, right? They're building all of these different factories that exist out there. We have a whole chip manufacturing industry that creates data centers. And then we have the frontier large language model companies that are creating these massive models that are amazing. But to what end? And to what purpose? And it's not just an ROI, right? Like, it's to do something great. And so, again, I guess we can close this session with asking your listeners to think about, where is AI manifestly going to make the world a better place, right? People are going to use it for business interests. We don't need to encourage that. But for companies like ours, companies like GroundVue and other amazing people that are trying to use AI for good, how do we think about this? How do we make this part of the way human society flourishes? How do we make AI a piece of that? And so it's an open question. I would love to have conversations with anybody who has great ideas or funding around these sorts of things. It is, I think, one of the most important questions we should be considering right now.
Agreed.
Yeah, I love
100%. Yeah, it's an unusual point of view, right? Because everything is about making money, and unfortunately, I think that doesn't make our world a better place.
I'm so torn with that. It's like, is it a really naive question to think, like, do those things have to be separate? To make money doesn't mean that you lose the ability to do good.
It becomes harder, And I
Yeah.
will say, like, we had the choice to become a strictly nonprofit, but we want to make a sustainable organization. That's why we incorporated as a public benefit corporation, right? Which gives us a mission and a drive. So Anthropic did that, and they are grappling with that choice with the Department of Defense and that whole spat that has come through. And they have stood on business for that, right? And for better or worse, they are standing by their PBC's mission. And so, yes, it can be done, but you saw the fallout that happened. So it's difficult to make these choices.
Okay, so physicist, White House advisor, CDC chief AI officer. You've now started over. Like, what is it that you're most excited about right now?
I mean, right now it's building this company. So not only are we going to launch nationally by the end of the year, we would love to have at least 3 states up in the next couple of months, and we have a plan for that one. But within 2 years, I would love to see a growth of this civic data infrastructure. I know how powerful AI can be, and I can see the gap between research and what's actually happening, and it's still going strong, right? Like, we're going to see advances. They are not going to slow for the next year and a half. And so what are we going to do with all these new tools? And I'm really excited to actually be in a place right now where, like, a new tool or a new technique or a new thing comes out, and like, okay, cool, we're building a new data set, a new data source that we can be doing things with.
Absolutely love that. Travis, where can people find you if they want to reach out, connect? Like, where's the best place?
So the best place probably to find me personally would be on LinkedIn. I don't know if you have show notes, but you can always drop those in there. I'm the only Travis Hoppe that's out there, so that does make it easier for SEO. But I do encourage anybody who's interested in GroundVue just to visit the site. It's groundvue.org. Again, put it in the show notes. There's probably lots of good places for that one. Amazingly, nobody had taken the name, so we have good SEO on that one as well. But if you're interested in building something around a tool like this, if you're interested in funding democracy in interesting ways, if you're interested in thinking about what AI can do for good, we have a plan for you. If you're an academic, we would love to be helping you in a couple of years. If you're a business, we would love to talk to you right now. If you're a funder and you want to see things like what we've been talking about today move forward and build communities around this, please reach out to me.
Love that.
Amazing. I mean, we'll make sure we'll promote your website and also this show, because it definitely need more people like yourself.
100%.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us, Travis. It's been great.
Thank you so
It was
much.
a pleasure. Thanks.